Imagine, for a second, a deity who looks down at the earth, sees the entirety of the human race, and just decides to drown every last man, woman, and child.
Right.
And not because they're wicked or, inherently evil or anything, but simply because they are being entirely too noisy and disrupting his sleep.
It's just wild to think about. It sounds completely absurd.
It really does. I mean, it's like a cranky landlord evicting a whole building full of loud tenants by just burning the place to the ground.
Exactly. But the thing is, that was actually the accepted dominant historical narrative in the ancient world.
Which is just crazy.
It is. I mean, that is how the earliest civilizations understood the divine, at least until one specific text came along and just completely rewrote the narrative.
Right, effectively laying the blueprint for human civilization as we know it today. And, well, that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. Today, we are opening up a really comprehensive dossier. It's titled Survey of Biblical Covenants, Noahic Covenant. And if you grew up around this story, or, even if you just absorbed it through cultural osmosis, you probably have a very specific image in your head.
Oh, totally. The nursery rhymes.
Yes, the nursery rhymes, little wooden arks with the painted
The
doors.
smiling giraffes and elephants, right? Sticking their heads out of the roof.
Exactly, marching up the ramp 2 by 2. But we are going to move completely past those Sunday school flannel graphs today.
We have to.
Yeah, because when you actually dig into the source material, into the actual text of Genesis chapters 8 and 9, you realize this isn't a children's tale at all. It's a narrative of absolute cosmic catastrophe.
The stakes, they really could not be higher here. To understand the gravity of what we're looking at, you have to realize that this isn't just an ancient myth to the people who originally heard it.
Right.
This is the exact lens through which the ancient world, and eventually the entire biblical narrative, understood the stability of the natural world.
Which is huge.
It is. It's the foundational argument for the sanctity of human life. And as we're going to explore, it contains a shockingly progressive environmental ethic.
Wait, really? Environmental?
Yeah, because this ancient covenant wasn't just made with humans, it was made with the animals and with the earth itself.
Okay, I really want to get into all of that, especially that environmental piece, because that sounds fascinating. But I feel like we need to set the stage first.
For sure.
Before we can even begin to understand the covenant, the promise made after the flood, we have to understand the cataclysm that made that promise necessary in the first place.
Like the context.
Yeah, we need to look at the historical soil, or I guess the muddy strata that this text actually grew out of.
Muddy strata is honestly the perfect way to phrase it. If you transport yourself back to the ancient Near East, to that cradle of civilization between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, you are in an environment that is just absolutely saturated with flood traditions.
Like everywhere.
Everywhere. Long before the biblical text of Genesis reached its final canonical form, the people living in that region carried this really deep collective memory of catastrophic, terrifying flooding.
So the Israelites who compiled Genesis weren't just writing this stuff in a vacuum.
Not at all. They were participating in a much, much larger conversation.
Okay.
They're living in a broader literary and historical world. The most prominent example we have from the historical source material is the Atrahasis epic.
Atrahasis.
Yeah, it's this massive Mesopotamian flood account that dates all the way back to the 17th century BCE. And you also have the later, maybe more famous one, the Gilgamesh epic.
Oh, yeah, Gilgamesh. People usually read that in high school or college.
Exactly. Specifically the standard Babylonian version of it, which shares huge narrative motifs with Atrahasis.
You mentioned the Tigris and the Euphrates earlier. Let's talk about the lived reality of these ancient people for a second, because I think it helps ground this.
Okay.
If you are an agrarian society back then, you have to live near the rivers to survive, right? You need the water for your crops, for your livestock, for trade. But that means you are constantly at the mercy of those exact same waters.
That dual reality is so crucial. The river is the source of all life, but it is also the source of ultimate sudden death.
Right.
And, it isn't just literary or mythological. There's actual hard archaeological evidence of massive flooding in this region.
Wow, really?
Yeah. Excavators working in ancient Mesopotamia at these major culturally significant sites like Ur and Kish and Shuruppak, they actually dug down and found deep, unmistakable water-laid deposits.
Like flood mud.
Exactly. We're talking about thick layers of barren sediment dating to the early 3rd millennium BCE that just completely interrupt the layers of human habitation.
That is wild.
It is. It proves that massive amounts of water just completely inundated and wiped out these ancient city-states.
Okay, I have to pause you right there, though, because I know how a lot of people listening to this might interpret that.
I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, when people hear archaeologists found ancient flood sediment, the automatic jump is, aha, they found scientific proof of the global biblical flood.
Right.
But our source material is very careful to draw a line there, isn't it?
Yes, and we need to be incredibly rigorous about that distinction. What we are looking at in the archaeological record is a shared memory environment.
A memory in a burn.
Yeah. We are not looking at definitive one-to-one proof of a global event. The archaeological evidence proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that catastrophic regional flooding occurred, right? And that it deeply scarred the collective memory of ancient Mesopotamia. But whether that historical trauma equates to a global deluge, that is a highly debated issue among scholars.
Because finding a few flooded cities doesn't mean the whole planet was underwater.
Precisely. The evidence supports a broad ancient flood memory. But excavating a few specific city-states in the Middle East does not offer direct archaeological proof that the entire globe was underwater simultaneously.
Which makes perfect logical sense. I mean, if a flood wipes out your entire known world, your city, your crops, your trade routes, it feels like a global apocalypse to you, even if it is technically regional.
Absolutely. To them, it was the end of the world.
So they have this shared trauma. They have these stories like Atrahasis. But when you put the Mesopotamian flood memory right next to the Genesis flood account, the contrast in why the flood happens is completely wild.
Oh, it's night and day.
You brought up the theology of the divine a minute ago. Walk us through that difference.
Well, in the ancient Near Eastern worldview, the gods are essentially just amplified, superpowered humans.
Right.
They're capricious, they get hungry, they get tired, and they get deeply, deeply annoyed. In the Atrahasis epic, the gods create humanity to do the heavy lifting, to dig the canals and work the fields so the gods can rest.
Okay.
But humanity's too successful. They multiply, and as a result, they're just being too noisy.
That is the part that always blows my mind. The gods are literally up in the heavens saying, we can't get a good night's sleep because of all this human racket.
That is the literal motivation. The chief god, Enlil, is irritated. He's inconvenienced by human labor and noise, and decides the only practical solution to his insomnia is to wipe out the entire human race with a flood.
It's just so petty. I mean, it's comical.
It really is.
But then you turn to Genesis. How does the biblical account flip that script? Because clearly the God of Genesis isn't just an annoyed cosmic landlord trying to enforce quiet hours.
Not at all. Genesis takes that exact same shared cultural memory of a devastating flood and completely reorients it around a profound moral judgment.
A moral judgment.
Yes, this is the big paradigm shift. In Genesis chapter 6, the text explicitly states the motivation for the flood. It says that human corruption and violence have reached cosmic proportions.
Wow.
The text actually says the earth was filled with violence. The biblical God isn't annoyed by noise. He is morally grieved by brutality.
It's a huge difference.
It changes everything. He looks at a world that has been completely distorted by human cruelty, and the flood is framed as an act of divine justice, not divine irritation.
So the stakes are deeply moral. It's not about convenience at all. It's about the fact that human beings are fundamentally destroying each other and the fabric of the created order.
Exactly.
And that moral framework is what sets the stage for everything that happens after the waters recede, which kind of brings us right to the edge of the new world.
Yeah, let's go there.
Let's imagine that exact moment. The text tells us the ark comes to rest on the mountains of Ararat, which scholars generally associate with the ancient Urartu region. Noah and his family step out. And I just try to picture the sheer sensory overload of this moment. I mean, the earth is empty. It has been scrubbed clean. There is no civilization left.
Just mud and silence.
Right. And the very first thing Noah does is not build a house. He doesn't plant a field.
Yeah.
He builds an altar.
This cannot be overstated. This is a massive liturgical turning point in the narrative. The first act of humanity in the new world is an act of worship and sacrifice.
Noah offers a burnt offering.
He does. And the text gives us this incredibly visceral detail. It says that the Lord smells the pleasing aroma of the sacrifice, and then he makes an inner resolve.
Our source material uses a very specific technical term right here. It says this is described in anthropopathic terms. Can you unpack that for us?
Sure. So anthropopathic language is when an ancient text describes the divine using human emotional states or internal processes. just so that we can grasp it.
Like giving God human feelings.
Exactly. It's attributing human feelings to God. The text says God speaks in his heart. He makes this internal emotional commitment that he will never again curse the ground because of humanity, and he will never again strike down every living creature as he has just done.
And he seals that with this beautiful rhythmic promise, right? While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease.
It's poetry.
It is. It's a guarantee of providential stability.
Yeah.
He is basically saying, I am locking the seasons into place.
He is. But here is where we have to look incredibly closely at the text, because there is a shocking theological paradox right in the middle of that very promise.
A paradox.
Yeah. In the exact same breath, where God promises not to destroy the earth, he gives the reason for his restraint.
Okay.
He says, I will not again curse the ground anymore for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth.
Wait, I have to stop you right there because if you were just reading that casually, it makes absolutely zero logical sense. Let's break this down.
Let's do it.
Before the flood, God sends the ultimate judgment because humanity is fundamentally evil and violent, right?
Right.
Now, after the flood, God says he won't send a judgment because humanity is fundamentally evil. That sounds entirely backward.
It really does.
How can the exact same diagnosis be the reason for both destruction and preservation?
It is a brilliant observation, and it is a complete pivot in the biblical narrative. You're right, it sounds completely backward. But it highlights the profound shift in the divine posture toward the world.
Help me understand this because my brain immediately goes to a parenting analogy.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine you have a parent who is constantly disciplining a child for misbehaving, for acting out, for breaking things. The parent is dealing with the symptoms through strict punishment.
Sure.
But then, one day, the parent takes the child to a specialist and gets a devastating diagnosis. The child has a deep-seated, chronic, inescapable illness. And that illness is actually what's causing the destructive behavior.
Oh, wow.
The parent's response completely shifts in that moment. They don't suddenly think the destructive behavior is good, but their approach shifts from immediate, severe punishment to long-term care and management.
Right, because the context changed.
Exactly, because they realize the child is fundamentally chronically sick. Is that sort of what's happening here?
That is a deeply resonant analogy, and it captures the theology of this moment perfectly. What we are witnessing here is the moment in the biblical text where God accepts the persistent, inescapable brokenness of humanity.
So the flood didn't fix them?
No.
Yeah.
The flood washed the physical earth. It scoured the mud and the cities, but it did absolutely nothing to wash the human heart. The core infection is still there.
Wow.
God realizes that if he operates strictly on the basis of absolute moral perfection, he is going to have to drown the world every single generation.
Because humanity is never going to achieve that standard on its own.
Precisely. So the text pivots entirely on divine mercy, not on human merit. God commits to sustaining the world in spite of humanity, not because of them.
That's fascinating.
He establishes the rhythm of the seasons, seed time and harvest, day and night, as a daily unmerited mercy. It is a creation preservation promise. The world will remain habitable, ordered, and morally accountable, despite the fact that humans are fundamentally flawed.
Okay, so the planet is secured, the Earth is going to keep orbiting the sun, the crops are going to grow, winter will follow summer. God has guaranteed that the physical stage won't collapse.
Right.
But now, he has to set the ground rules for the actors living on that stage. Because as we just established, these actors are still carrying the infection of violence.
Exactly.
How do you govern a world of people who are fundamentally dangerous? You need a completely new set of ground rules. And that moves us right into the post-flood ethical mandate, the new constitution of humanity.
And the very first thing God does in this new constitution is recommission humanity. He echoes the original blessing from the Garden of Eden, telling Noah and his family to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth.
A total reboot.
He is officially rebooting the human project. But as you pointed out, because the human heart is still compromised, this reboot comes with some severe modifications.
It really does feel like a post-apocalyptic societal reboot. It's
Yeah.
like humanity just got upgraded from the Garden of Eden's peaceful vegetarian existence, but now there are all these intense safety protocols attached to everyday life.
For sure.
For instance, suddenly meat consumption is permitted.
That is a major shift. Prior to that, in the narrative, the assumption in the text was a vegetarian diet for humanity. Now, God explicitly says that every moving thing that lives shall be food for them.
But there's a catch.
A huge catch. He immediately follows it with a strict, unbending caveat. They are allowed to eat meat, but they are absolutely forbidden from eating flesh with its life, which the text explicitly identifies as its blood.
I really want to dig into this because to someone listening today, this feels like such a strange, specific rule to put at the very beginning of a new civilization.
It does seem really granular.
Right. Why this intense focus on blood? Why not just give them a broad philosophical rule like, hey, try not to be so violent this time around? Why get so deeply specific about ancient butchery and dietary laws right out of the gate?
To understand this, you have to look at how the ancient world, and specifically the Hebrew language used in this text, conceptualized life. The Hebrew word for blood is dam.
Damn.
Yes. And in this cultural framework, dam represents the actual, literal life force of the creature. The fundamental principle being established here is that all life belongs exclusively to God.
So, by forbidding the consumption of blood, what is God forcing them to do?
He is forcing humanity to constantly physically acknowledge that they are not the ultimate authors or owners of life.
Mhm.
Even when they take an animal's life for sustenance, which they are now permitted to do, they have to pour out the lifeblood onto the ground.
Oh, I see.
They have to symbolically, ritually return the life to God. It acts as a permanent break on human hubris.
It's a daily, visceral reminder of limits. You can eat to survive, you can harvest the animal, but you cannot consume the essence of life itself. You are a guest at the table, not the owner of the house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Beautifully put. And that logic regarding the life of animals leads directly into the next, even more critical law regarding the life of humans.
Okay.
God moves from animal husbandry to the very foundation of civil justice.
Mm-hmm.
God says that he will require reckoning for the life of man. He institutes this law. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image.
In his own image, the imago Dei. I feel like we throw that term around a lot in philosophical or theological discussions today, but in this specific context, it changes everything about how we view a crime, doesn't it?
It changes it fundamentally and permanently. Before this, or in other ancient cultures, homicide might be viewed merely as a social offense.
Like a property crime almost.
Exactly. It was a crime against a community, or maybe a financial loss of a worker, or a grievance against a specific family that could be paid off with a fine. But here, homicide is elevated to a supreme theological offense.
Because of the image.
Because human beings bear the image of God. A physical attack on a human being is treated as a direct attack on the divine image itself.
I want to make sure I'm grasping the magnitude of this. This means that human dignity, your inherent value as a person, is not granted to you by the state.
No.
It isn't granted by how much money you make or how useful you are to society or what class you were born into. According to this text, your dignity is hardwired into your very existence by the Creator. You are untouchable because you reflect God.
That is the exact argument the text is making. And this is why this ancient, muddy narrative remains so incredibly relevant for you today. If we step back and look at this impartially, regardless of your personal religious background, this specific passage in Genesis is one of the foundational bedrock arguments for the sanctity of life in Western legal and ethical thought.
That's incredible.
It is also historically seen as the basis for civil authority.
Oh, right. Our source material brings up a scholar named David Van Drunen here in relation to civil authority. What is his specific angle on this?
Well, Van Drunen and many other scholars who study biblical covenants argue that Genesis 9 provides the vital, necessary background for later biblical concepts of government.
How so?
For example, when the Apostle Paul writes in Romans 13 about civil authorities bearing the sword to execute justice, he's drawing on the intellectual architecture of the Noahic Covenant. The idea is that God actually authorizes human institutions to protect life and punish violence, precisely to keep the world from spiraling back into the chaos and bloodshed that caused the flood in the first place.
Okay, I see that. But I have to push back a little on the mechanism here. The law says, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. It is mandating a lethal penalty for a lethal crime. Isn't it counterintuitive to use violence to punish violence?
It can certainly seem that way to modern sensibilities. But within the logic of the text, it is about proportional justice and the absolute, uncompromising sanctity of the divine image.
The scales have to balance.
Right. The crime of destroying God's image is so uniquely horrific that it demands the ultimate reckoning. It is intended as the ultimate deterrent.
When you lay it out like that, it really completely rejects two of the major extremes we see in how people view society. On one hand, it utterly rejects nihilism, the idea that life is just a biological accident, cheap and meaningless. You can't be a nihilist if you believe every person bears the divine image.
Very true.
But on the other hand, it also rejects utopianism.
I like that. How so? Unpack that for us.
Well, utopianism assumes that human beings are perfectly good at their core and that we can just build a flawless, peaceful society if we just get the politics right or the economics right or the education right.
Right. The blank slate idea.
Yeah. But this covenant assumes the exact opposite. It assumes that humans are still deeply capable of terrible, unprovoked violence. That's why the law against murder has to be so explicitly stated and enforced with such severe penalties. It is essentially telling humanity, you are immensely, infinitely valuable, but you are also highly, highly dangerous.
That is an excellent synthesis of the tension here. We are immensely valuable, but we are highly dangerous. And because we're so dangerous, God has to formalize his relationship with the world to ensure its preservation against our worst impulses.
And that leads us to the covenant itself.
Exactly, which brings us to the actual formal covenant ceremony. We talked about the laws, so now let's talk about the treaty.
And this is where the scope of this entire narrative just blows my mind, because when we think of a covenant, we usually think of a contract between two parties.
Sure, human to human.
Right. But God doesn't just pull Noah into a back room and sign a private, non-disclosure agreement with his family. He brings the whole planet into the boardroom.
The universality of this covenant is stunning, especially for an ancient text. The text says God makes this covenant with Noah and with his descendants after him, but it doesn't stop there.
No, it goes way further.
He explicitly makes it with every living creature that was with them. The birds, the livestock, every beast of the earth. The Hebrew phrase used repeatedly here is basar, which translates to all flesh. And it goes even one step further. The covenant is established with the earth itself.
It's literally an ecological treaty, which, again, is something you absolutely do not expect to find in ancient literature.
No, not at all.
You expect ancient texts to be entirely human-centric, focused purely on kings and empires and human survival. But here, the animals are getting a seat at the table.
Cambridge scholarship has focused heavily on this aspect, emphasizing the ecocentric nature of the Noahic Covenant. Non-human animals are not just props in this story.
Right, they aren't just background characters.
They are treated as actual, literal covenant partners. They are direct participants in this divine promise of preservation. And that raises profound, challenging implications for how humanity is supposed to steward the environment.
I mean, it changes our whole relationship to nature.
It does. If God made a covenant with the animals, it means we are not the only beneficiaries of God's grace here. The whole created order has value in the eyes of the divine.
Okay, here is where it gets incredibly fascinating to me. Every covenant, every major treaty needs a sign, right? Like a wedding ring in a marriage or a seal on a document.
There's always a physical token.
And the sign of this universal ecocentric covenant is the famous rainbow, the sign in the clouds. This is the image we put on all the baby blankets.
Yep, the classic Sunday school visual.
But the source material points out something about the original Hebrew language here that completely changes the tone of this image. The Hebrew word used for bow is quashet.
And quashet, in its primary ancient context, does not mean a pretty multicolored optical illusion in the sky after a light rain.
It doesn't.
No, it means a war bow, a weapon of combat, a tool of destruction.
A weapon. So let's paint this picture for a second. God is essentially acting like a conquering general. He has just unleashed the ultimate unstoppable cosmic weapon, the floodwaters, to wipe out the violent rebellion on Earth.
Right.
And now the war is over. He is taking his primary weapon, his war bow, he is stringing it, and he is hanging it up in the sky. But what is the crucial visual detail about how a rainbow arches in the sky?
Think about the shape.
The bow is pointing away from the Earth. It's pointing up into the heavens.
It is a breathtaking and deeply powerful ancient Near Eastern image. God is literally symbolically laying down his weapon of cosmic destruction. He is hanging it in the clouds as a permanent public sign of military restraint.
It's the ultimate act of divine de-escalation. He is saying, I have the power to destroy you, but I am retiring the weapon.
Yes. But there's another crucial detail in the text regarding this sign that we absolutely cannot miss, and it hinges on the Hebrew word zakar, which translates as to remember.
Right, because usually a sign is for the human party. I wear a wedding ring so that I remember my vows, and so that other people know I'm spoken for. We build monuments so we don't forget our history.
But look at who the text says the sign in the sky is actually for. God says, when the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant.
Wait, God remembers?
The bow isn't primarily there for us to look at so we feel safe and warm inside. The text explicitly says it is for God to look at and for God to remember his own promise.
Wait, hold on. I have to play the skeptic here. If we are talking about an omniscient, all-knowing God, obviously, he doesn't suffer from amnesia.
Fair point.
He doesn't need a cosmic sticky note on the fridge to remember not to flood the earth again. So what does it actually mean that an omniscient being needs to remember?
It is a great question. In biblical language, the concept of remembering isn't about recalling forgotten information like where you left your keys.
Okay, what is it then?
Remembering is covenantal language. It is about taking intentional action based on a prior commitment. When God remembered his covenant, he is actively, dynamically upholding it.
Oh, I see.
By putting the sign in the sky, God is making a public, relational declaration that he has bound himself to this promise. He is saying to humanity, I am holding myself accountable to this restraint, and I am putting the proof of it in the sky for both of us to see.
So if we pause and look at where we are in the narrative, God has made peace with the world, the war bow is hung up, the earth is preserved, humanity is told to multiply, the animals are safe under a divine treaty, the ground rules for civil justice are established.
Sounds perfect.
It sounds like the perfect setup for a happily ever after, the ultimate fresh start.
Yeah.
But we have a massive hangover coming.
We do. We move into the final section of Genesis 9,
Oh.
and the story takes an immediate, dark, almost shocking turn.
It is absolute violent whiplash for the reader. Think about Noah. He is the hero of the faith. He is the one righteous man who stood against the violence of the old world. He is the guy who just built the ark, saved humanity, and led the first worship service in the brand new world.
The ultimate patriarch.
And what is the very next thing he does? He plants a vineyard. He makes wine. He gets incredibly blackout drunk, and he passes out naked in his tent.
And it gets worse. His son, Ham, enters the tent, sees his father's nakedness, and instead of covering him, he goes out and tells his brothers.
Which is awful.
This is a profound act of disrespect and violation. His other sons, Shem and Japheth, have to take a garment, put it on their shoulders, and walk into the tent backward to cover their father so they don't shame him any further.
And then the fallout. When Noah wakes up from his stupor and finds out what Ham did, he doesn't just yell at him. He doesn't just ground his son. He pronounces a severe, terrifying generational curse.
A huge curse.
But he doesn't curse Ham. He curses Ham's son, Canaan.
Yes. The text says, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers."
Okay, explain this to me, because to a modern listener, cursing the grandson for what the son did just sounds like pure, unadulterated injustice. Why Canaan? Why is Noah reacting this way? What does this entire bizarre, tragic scene actually mean?
It's confusing, I know.
Honestly, as a reader, it feels like a massive narrative failure. Did the flood even work? What was the point of all that water and destruction if this is exactly how the new world starts within one single generation?
Answer your first question about Canaan. You have to understand the deep honor-shame dynamics and the patriarchal structure of the ancient Near Eastern household.
Okay, honor shame culture.
Exactly. In that culture, a patriarch's ultimate glory was his lineage, his progeny. Ham's sin was an attempt to usurp his father's authority and shame him at his most vulnerable moment.
So it was a power grab.
Very much so. By cursing Canaan, Ham's youngest son, Noah is essentially striking at Ham's future, his legacy. It is a way of saying, you tried to tear down my honor, so your own lineage will bear the ultimate shame of subjugation.
Wow, that is brutal.
It is harsh, but within the logic of an ancient honor-shame culture, it is the most devastating blow a patriarch could deliver.
It's a complete breakdown of the family unit immediately after the world has been saved.
Exactly. And to answer your second, bigger question, did the flood even work? The point of this narrative being placed right here immediately after the covenant is precisely to show you that the flood didn't fix the human problem.
Not at all.
It proves dramatically and tragically that physical rescue does not eliminate spiritual fallenness. Remember what God said just a chapter earlier, the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth.
So this story of Noah in the tent is essentially Exhibit A proving God's diagnosis. It shows that the infections survived the flood. It came right onto the boat with them.
Yes. This narrative is strategically placed to prove the core theological implication of the entire Noahic Covenant. It shows that the covenant is preservational, not salvific.
Preservational, not salvific. Break that distinction down for us clearly.
It means the covenant of Genesis 9 was never designed to save human souls. It doesn't fix the sin problem. It doesn't transform the human heart or make people inherently good.
So what does it do?
All it does is create a safe, stable, physical container for history to continue. It keeps the stage of the world from collapsing in on itself until the root infection of sin can be dealt with in a more permanent, profound way. Noah's catastrophic moral failure shows us that humanity needs something much deeper than a flood of water to wash away the evil inside of them.
I love that visual. It's like humanity survived this massive shipwreck. We made it to the deserted island. We built a shelter, but we brought the deadly virus with us on our clothes.
That's a brilliant way to put it.
The shelter keeps the rain off, but it doesn't cure the virus.
That is exactly the dynamic. And if the Noahic Covenant didn't cure the virus, if it didn't ultimately save human souls, we have to ask the logical next question. Where does it actually fit in the grand scheme of things? Why is it there?
We have to zoom out.
Exactly, which requires us to look at the macro view of the entire biblical timeline.
Let's talk about the grand stage, because if you zoom out, you see that the biblical narrative isn't just a random collection of disconnected stories. It's a highly structured architectural progression of covenants.
It is deeply structured. If we map it out based on the theological framework of our source material, you start with creation, the original design.
Then the fall?
Right. That leads to the fall, the introduction of the infection, that leads to the judgment of the flood. And then you have this Noahic preservation covenant. God stabilizes the world.
Okay, and then what?
And because the world is stabilized and preserved, you can then have the Abrahamic election, where God chooses one specific family to work through. That leads to the Sinai law given to Moses, which structures that family into a nation.
Then David.
Yes, that leads to the Davidic kingship, which ultimately, in the Christian theological framework, culminates in the new covenant in Christ and points toward a final new creation.
It's a sequence of necessary stepping stones. To go back to the stage analogy, it's like the Noahic Covenant was the construction crew that built the physical stage, laid down the heavy oak floorboards, and turned on the theater lights.
I like that.
Yeah, they do all that so that the rest of the play, the dramatic stories of Abraham, Moses, David, and Jesus could actually be performed. If Noah's Covenant doesn't happen, the theater just burns down and the play never gets written.
That is a fantastic way to visualize it. Yeah. And this exact dynamic is why theologians have such rigorous, ongoing debates about how to properly classify the Noahic Covenant.
There's a debate about it.
Oh, definitely. Our source material highlights this debate. Some theologians view the Noahic Covenant strictly under the category of common grace.
Common grace, meaning a type of grace or goodness that is common to absolutely everyone, regardless of what they believe or who they worship. Like the idea that the rain falls on the just and the unjust equally. Everyone gets to enjoy a sunset.
Precisely. It is unmerited goodness given to all humans indiscriminately. It restrains evil and allows society to flourish.
But not everyone agrees with that label.
No, other theologians push back and stress its direct, inseparable continuity with redemptive history. They argue that you can't separate the physical stage from the redemptive play.
Because they're tied together.
Exactly. The physical preservation of the world is inherently, inextricably tied to God's ultimate plan to spiritually redeem the world. You can't have one without the other.
And I appreciate that the source material explicitly states we should name that debate rather than trying to flatten it out into one simple answer. Both perspectives capture something incredibly vital.
They really do.
It is common grace. Every single person listening to this right now, no matter their background, benefits from the fact that the earth is stable and society's laws. But it's also redemptive history, because when you look at how the New Testament writers treat Noah, they don't just see a historical figure.
Not at all.
They look back at the flood and see massive, flashing neon signs pointing toward Christ.
The Christological connections that the later biblical authors make are profound. You have the ark itself, which is seen as prefiguring Christ as the ultimate vehicle of rescue from divine judgment.
Right.
The author of the book of Hebrews talks about Noah building the ark for the saving of his household as a supreme act of faith.
And the Apostle Peter goes even further, making a very specific theological connection. In his first letter, 1 Peter 3:20-21, he explicitly connects the waters of the flood to the waters of baptism. How does that work?
He draws a direct parallel. He writes that the waters of the flood, which brought death and judgment to the old, violent world but safely carried Noah and his family through to a new creation, correspond to the sacrament of baptism.
Oh, I see.
He says, baptism now saves you, not as a physical removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The theological imagery of moving safely through the terrifying waters of death into a brand new life is entirely drawn from the Genesis flood narrative.
Which makes Noah what scholars refer to as an eschatological type.
Yes, eschatology is the theological study of final ultimate things. The end of the story, the final judgment, and the final restoration.
And Jesus talks about this too, right?
He does. Jesus himself uses the story of Noah in this exact eschatological way. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24, Jesus is warning his disciples that the final judgment of the world will come incredibly suddenly, catching people off guard.
The famous Days of Noah passage.
Right, he says, "For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man." He describes people eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, going about their ordinary daily lives, completely unaware of the spiritual reality until the crisis suddenly hits.
But there is a crucial difference here, and this is the ultimate hope of the biblical narrative. The final horizon of the story is not just another catastrophic flood. God explicitly promised that. He hung up the war bow.
You retired the weapon.
Yes. The final horizon, according to the very end of the New Testament, is a completely new creation, a permanent structural restoration of both the earth and the human heart, not just a temporary preservation of a broken system.
The Noahic Covenant is the sturdy container that holds the broken world together until that final new creation can finally arrive.
Which brings us to the synthesis of everything we've unpacked today. I want you to think about your own life for a second. Think about your drive to work today.
Yeah, bring it into the present.
Think about how incredibly easy it is to take the baseline stability of our world entirely for granted. You wake up, the sun rises on schedule, you go to the grocery store, and there is food on the shelves because the rhythm of seed time and harvest hasn't failed.
We rely on it every day.
We do. You pass by police cars or courthouses expecting the laws of our society to protect human life and punish violence, because we intuitively, deeply believe that human beings have inherent value.
We are all, quite literally, living our everyday lives entirely within the ancient architecture of Genesis 8 and 9.
It is the invisible architecture of our reality. And what this deep dive reveals is that this architecture isn't just a happy biological accident. According to this text, it is the direct result of a divine promise.
A massive promise.
A promise made to an empty, muddy, traumatized world that God's purposes are larger than any one group of people. A promise that encompasses all flesh, every animal, and the entirety of the created order.
And I think that raises a profound final image for you to mull over as we close.
Yeah.
We talked extensively about the sign of the covenant, the rainbow, the Wokasha.
The warbow.
Yes, God's terrifying war bow strung and hung up in the sky to signify a temporary, gracious restraint of his judgment.
Pointed away from us, toward the heavens.
Yes, but consider the imagery at the very, very end of the biblical canon. If you turn to the book of Revelation, chapter 4, you get a visionary glimpse of the ultimate final reality. The Apostle John is looking at the divine throne in heaven, and he describes seeing a rainbow.
But it's different, right?
Very different. It isn't just a bow in the clouds, spanning a small portion of the sky after a rainstorm.
How does he describe it?
The text says the rainbow completely encircles the throne. It is a full, unbroken circle of emerald light.
A full circle.
It suggests that God's ultimate, final eschatological posture toward the cosmos isn't just a temporary truce. It isn't just a weapon temporarily hung on the wall until he gets angry again. It is an eternal, unbreakable 360-degree surround sound piece.
An eternal 360-degree piece, from the terrifying muddy flood strata of ancient Mesopotamia to a permanent circle of light around the throne of the universe. That is something to seriously think about the next time you step outside after a storm and look up at the sky. It's a lot more profound than a painted wooden ark in a baby's room.